All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Getting After It podcast with me, your host, Brett Rossell. Now, today's episode, we're going to be building upon last week's episode, which was about extreme ownership. We talked a little bit about what that concept means and just a few things that you could do to implement it into your life. One of the things that we talked about in there is realizing that everyone has mental hurdles and challenges that they have to face in their life, no matter what, no matter who you are. Everyone has something that they're going to have to deal with mentally. We talk a lot about conflict within relationships, conflict within your business or whatever that is. But what we're going to be focusing on and emphasizing today is the most challenging opponent that you face, and that's you, the person that you look in the mirror. So you versus you all the time. We are really good at telling ourselves certain stories that put something off that we should be doing, but we don't. I'll give you an example of this. This podcast is one of the very things that I struggled with starting. I really wanted to. Like I mentioned in the very first episode, since 2015, I've been listening to podcasts, and believe it or not, it's taken priority over listening to things like music, and I still do, but I really enjoy listening to podcasts. It's something that helps stimulate my brain, keeps me engaged and entertained. I can listen to it if I'm on a run, if I'm in the car, on a long drive, on a flight, anything like that. Listening to podcasts gives me a chance to become educated and to learn. And with that said, I always wanted to do that. The goal with this podcast is to inspire someone, anybody, even if it's just one person, to do something that they're scared of doing. The point of getting after it is that, we're not always perfect, and getting after it is actually a challenge. It's something that you have to tell yourself and push yourself beyond your boundaries or what you're comfortable with doing. And that's important to me. So going back to the podcast and why I had a hard time starting it, the main idea was, who am I to tell people to go pursue their passions? I'm a 24-year-old kid. What have I accomplished in my life? These are some of the stories that I was telling myself. No one's going to listen to this. Okay, great. I might get some hate comments. People are going to judge me. People are going to judge you anyway. So why not do something that you don't want to do because someone that's sitting on their couch is judging you? Who cares what they think? Doesn't matter. So that was a few of the things that I would tell myself. I was on days when I didn't want to put in effort for the podcast. It was like, well, there's other things I could be doing that are a lot easier. I can go hang out with my buddies, or maybe, play some video games, cool off, read a book. I don't know. But the point is I was trying to tell myself things and distract myself with other things that really put off what I wanted to do. And that was start the podcast. And the reason I was putting them off is because I was scared. It was hard for me to push that first upload button when I recorded my first 15-minute, hey, this is what the podcast is going to be about. Bear with me as I figure out all this stuff. That was a really hard moment for me when I sat in this area. If you're watching on YouTube, I sat here and I looked at my computer. Everything was good to go in terms of the upload was on the website. It uploaded correctly. I had all my album artwork there. It was good. There was no reason for me to not press upload. But that voice crept into my head again and said, "You're not good enough for this. Who are you to tell people that they should be getting after it?" Anyways, that's the voice of my inner demon that I have to control every day. Yeah. We call that demon Kenny. So if your name is Kenny, I'm sorry about that. Anyways, I finally did it because I told myself, what's the worst that can happen? Sure, I might get 3 listeners on my podcast. Great. If I can inspire one of those 3 listeners to go do something that they're scared of doing, good. Then I accomplished my mission and I consider this a success. Or the fear of judgment was there too. I did not want to be judged. I'm putting myself out there and I'm throwing out experiences that I've had that people are going to have opinions on. Great. Let them have their own opinions because I'm doing what I want to do. And if there's something that you want to do, and if you're not doing it because you're scared, put the fear aside. There's this great exercise that Tim Ferriss has. It's called fear setting. And the concept of it is you sit down and you basically think of the worst case scenario. Take my podcast, for example. Worst case scenario, I get 3 listeners. I get judged. People call me names. They call me out. I get called a fraud, whatever. That's the worst case scenario. If you can deal with that outcome, but still go and try and get after it and start something, then do it. If you can deal with the outcome, whatever the worst case scenario might be, then you can start. Don't tell yourself otherwise, and don't come up with another excuse to put that aside. That's my experience with overcoming some mental hurdles. Is you just have to go and get after it and start. And know that if you fail, that's okay. Because your self-worth is in you and it's not in things that you're pursuing. My podcast is not, I mean, I care about it and all that stuff, but it's not me, right? Brett is someone who, like, I want to be known as someone who goes and helps other people or gets work done. That's Brett, not the podcast. So figure out your identity and whatever comes your way. Hey, you're good to go. But I feel like I've told a lot of my experiences already in these short 4 episodes that I've done. Again, I'm working on getting guests on the podcast, so please be patient and bear with me through this process. With that said, I reached out to some friends and family members and I asked them one question about overcoming mental hurdles. And it was basically this. This is the question. Let me pull it up. So it says, what do you do to overcome mental hurdles? Or what do you tell yourself? So it's a very simple question, but I wanted to get the perspective of a bunch of different people instead of just me telling you. Because, my thing, how I handle mental challenges might work for you, but how some other people do it might work better for you. And then that's the thing too, is you just got to figure out what works for you and what doesn't. And I want to start with my friend Spencer. He gave me a really good answer on this, and I wanted to start because what he says here. So let me just go ahead and start reading this for you. He says the first thing that we need to do is recognize there will be challenges, period. We're all human, so it's going to happen. Just by being aware that there will be mental hurdles in the future already prepares us to take them on more efficiently because we are over the surprise factor. I'm just going to pause here for a second because I believe that that is true. If you tell yourself, okay, this is going to be a journey, this is a campaign, this is not a overnight thing. I'm going to run into challenges, I'm going to run into successes. You tell yourself these things, then you've already got to step up in terms of being in front of other people. So keep that in mind. So going back to Spencer, when it comes, we expect it. Another thing that helped me a lot is being consistent. Training threshold is about 75 to 95% of our best. And I think here, let me give you some context on Spencer real quick. He's a monster that can deadlift 605 pounds. So he's a pretty big beast. And what he means by training threshold is every day you show up, you're not going to be doing your best. And he goes into that here. So back to Spencer. We can't replicate a PR max every single day. We can't replicate our very best effort every single day just because some days are better than others. That's how it goes. what we can do is find that threshold between 75 to 95%. As long as we get out there and put in the work, we are going to get better. Fully agree on that. Then he says, the point is just getting there. If that be the gym, the library, study, or just opening the computer or application you're using for work, or sending that text message, making that call, just make that initial action, and you will be astonished at where that momentum takes you. Just show up every single day, make the initial choice for growth, and it will compound and turn into something great. So those are some thoughts from Spencer, and he could not have said it better, or I couldn't have said it better. Spencer nailed it on the head, because my very first thing with overcoming mental challenges is just realize that nothing in life that is good will ever come easy. If it's good, you're going to struggle for it and work for it. And that's important. You should want to work and put in the effort for the things that matter. So realizing before you even start a product or a project or an ambition, that there will be challenges that'll put you ahead of other people. I know that's true. If there's something you want to do, realize you're going to have to work for it. Again, nothing good in life comes easy. So if you're already doing that, you're already going to be ahead. But let me just highlight a few other things that I asked some of my other friends for. Actually, my brother Blake, I asked him the same thing. And he was asking me, he's like, well, what do you mean? What do I tell myself? And I was like, exactly that. What do you tell yourself when you overcome or when you run into some challenges? And he said this, don't suck. I swear a lot in my head. Last night, I didn't want to go to the gym. It had been 3 days. So I yelled in my head with a smile, of course, and it worked. And I went to the gym, and that was his answer. It's like, hey, you know what? You could do it. Stop telling yourself these stories. Get out of your head. Yell at yourself a little bit if that works, but with a smile, as my brother Blake does. Good job, Blake. I see you smiling right now. Beautiful smile you got there. Wink. Sorry about that. That's the other thing too, is like we tell ourselves these negative stories. What would happen if we started telling ourselves these positive stories? Or instead of being like, oh man, maybe I could push off the gym another day, be like, what would happen if I went to the gym 3 days in a row? I don't know. What would happen? Like, you tell me. You're the one that's facing it, not me. So that was some good advice from him. And I apologize if you hear there's a machine going right now in my house. So I apologize for that if you can hear it. I'll try and denoise that. Anyways, so let's move on to a few other things. I asked my brother Drew, and same kind of deal. He said, when I was in high school, I had a coach that told us when things go bad or things don't go your way or go the way we want, there are two options. You can work or cry. Crying doesn't solve any issues. However, working produces a result. And that was my brother Drew. And that stuck with him. I had that same coach, and she harped on that with us. And I'm so glad that she did, because what she taught us is that there's more value in work and there's more value in putting in effort than there is in complaining and trying to find things that are wrong in society. And you don't have to go too far from social media than looking at all these people who apparently have the worst lives in the entire world as they're typing it on a phone, right? Or like a piece of technology that half the world doesn't have access to. Like, man, my Starbucks coffee was a little bit cold today. Come on, don't cry. Just get it done. Even though that was a really bad example, but you know what I'm saying. We have it pretty good, and we can always work harder and make our lives better. So that was just a couple of things that they did. Another thing that I do personally is I take a page out of Jocko's book on this, and he talks about the importance of detaching from your situation. And what detaching is literally, he says, stand up take a step back and look at the situation from an outside perspective. In his book, Extreme Ownership, he talks about how people would get something called target fixation, which they would focus too much on the problem at hand or the target at hand, quite literally, because they were talking about guns and looking down your sights. And they would get so focused on the target that they wouldn't be able to see beyond, right? Because they're trying to hit it. And he'd say, sometimes take a step back, look around, make a call, and take some action. But you can apply this to your life in a lot of different ways. And I think this is a really important thing to do, that my friend Logan actually has a good plan on this. I asked him the same question, and he says, I'm a big believer in breaks and setting little deadlines for myself. For example, I'm going to take a walk after I do this thing, or I'm going to do all the dishes by 3 p.m. And after that, reward yourself. So that's Logan. And his form of detaching is, I'm going to take a walk after I do this, right? And if you're struggling in your computer, if you work in like customer service and someone's yelling at you, that person might be having a hard day. Detach yourself from the situation and think about it from an outside perspective. Like, okay, that person might have yelled at me, but hey, I'm good, because they weren't yelling at me. They were yelling at the situation or whatever. But detach, take some time and think about the situation instead of freak out about where you're at. I've also realized that this helps me be a little bit more in the moment, because when I find myself feeling overwhelmed or stuck or unmotivated or whatever the situation might be, I often realize that I'm either thinking ahead or thinking in the past. Like anxiety is thinking in the future, I think I've heard it say. And I'm not a psychologist or a doctor, so don't take anything I say as like doctrine or it's the literature, whatever. I'm just some guy with a podcast filming this in my house. Anyways, when I find myself looking too far in the future, like if I know I have an upcoming trip that's coming here soon, like a couple of days I'm heading to Arizona, I want to make sure I have everything lined up at work, so when I leave in Arizona, I can kind of relax, enjoy my time with my family. But that leads me to think a lot more in like the future. Like, okay, I gotta get this done before I leave. I gotta go pick up the dry cleaning or get some groceries. I don't know, whatever I have to do. I need to spray the 10 black widows I found by my apartment door so I don't come back to a swarm of Halloween surprises. And no, thank you. Anyways, all these different tasks. If I find myself thinking too far ahead in the future, I have to step back and realize that it's going to be all right. Same thing with the past. Like if it happened in the past, it's already done. So why are you worrying about it now? Let it go. That's one of the biggest superpowers you can learn to develop is we all make mistakes in our lives. No matter who you are, everyone's going to make mistakes because we are human. And if you can learn to let those go and learn from those mistakes instead of being like, little poopy pants attitude going on here, like feeling sorry for myself. If you can let that go and learn from it instead, you'll be so much better. Be so far ahead of everyone else because you'll understand that we all fail and those failings are an education and not an hindrance to us. So take time to step back. And Jocko says it best. I'm sorry, I think I've brought him up every single podcast, but the guy knows what he's talking about. And he says, one of the key qualities a leader must possess is the ability to detach from chaos, mayhem, and emotions in a situation and make good, clear decisions based on what is actually happening. And that's a really good point too, is you have to realize when you're making emotional decisions and then when you're making decisions based on fact. So, example, you're in bed The alarm goes off at 6 a.m. And your emotional state is saying, I'm tired. Man, I don't want to get up. I can't get up. This bed is comfortable. Are you kidding me? I have these sheets flown in from Italy that are 1,000 thread count. Why would I want to get up? Then you have to realize, if I don't get up, here's where the factual thinking comes in. If I don't get up now, I'm going to be so groggy the rest of the day. I'm going to feel like I'm not ahead of the game. I got to get up and get my day started. And boom, you do that, start telling yourself a different story. And it's like what Spencer said, it's that consistent story we tell ourselves. So if you're making those emotional decisions, if you're leaning more towards that type of thinking, then those are the habits that you're going to be forming, is things that are based on your emotions. Now, Jocko also mentions how it's important to not be so rigid that you don't have those emotions on your side. It's just balancing between them and detaching so you can identify what decision to make, if that makes any sense. And Jocko, if you're ever listening to this, I'm so sorry if I got that wrong. Anyways, so the last thing that I want to harp on today is just going beyond your comfort zone and trying new things. That's the biggest way that I would suggest you ever overcome a mental hurdle, is try new things. Put yourself out there. Start a podcast, start a YouTube channel, start a business if that's what you want. If you're really good at crocheting baby beanies and that's your passion, then do it. What's holding you back? Think about the things that could potentially be a hindrance. If you can handle them, if the worst case scenario is doable, then do it. Why are you waiting? You should. You're going to have to callous your mind. And this is another thing that David Goggins, who is a superhuman, I'm sure I'll talk about him later on, but he talks about this concept of callousing your mind. And it's making those harder choices consistently, right? Going on a run, developing that habit. Sitting down and writing, developing that habit. If that's something you want to do, if you are a stand-up comedian and you need to write jokes, put in the discipline it takes to do that every single day. You have to callous your mind and develop these talents because no one else is going to do it for you. One of my friends, her name's Mariah, she is a beast, and she just did the 75 Hard Challenge, which if you don't know what that is, please go Google it. But to give you an idea, it's just a time where you challenge yourself for 75 days to do very difficult things, like 2-day workouts, drink a gallon of water, eat healthy. There's all these things that you have to hold yourself to, read. And she just finished it again. And I asked her, I said, well, on those days when you didn't want to do anything, what did you do? She said, you have to remind yourself that your future self will thank you. You'll never regret putting your body, mind, or health first. Once you decide you want to live a healthy lifestyle, you have to continue to commit and show up in order to be healthy and dedicated. And I love that. Think about it. What has been a difficult thing that you've done that your future self wouldn't thank you for? One example of this is my college degree. I got a college degree, and the entire time I was doing it, I was like, you know what? Elon Musk says he's hiring people without a college degree. I don't need one. Or no one really cares about college degree. I can go on YouTube University and really learn there, which is true. You can learn so much on the internet, and it's such a great resource. But the point there is, I wouldn't have the job that I currently have if I didn't have a college degree. Or I wouldn't meet some of the people that I wouldn't have met if I didn't go to college and experience some of the stories that I experienced, which, by the way, we'll get into some of those in there. Pretty tasteful, I would say. So yeah, your future self will thank you no matter what. And going on beyond your comfort zone is something that my friend Allie Murphy is actually really good at doing as well. I asked her the same question. She said, you need to celebrate the small victories, right? If you do something good, recognize it. Don't push it under the rug. So that's the first thing. But the other thing that she said to get out of your comfort zone is get outside, try something new, and try not to stay stagnant. Don't be on the couch. She gave some examples of this. She was telling me, she's like, yeah, last month I started rollerblading. Just went outside, started rollerblading, looked like a clown, but hey, that was it. And she's like, September, I'm going to start skateboarding. That's freaking awesome. You do you. But her point there was like, get outside, try something new, get exposed to the sun. You know, we're inside all the time. And so getting out in the sun might be enough to help you overcome a mental hurdle. If you're struggling, maybe you need a little time in nature, my friend. It's important. And this is actually something Allie is a very strong person and someone who I admire to the 10th degree or whatever the phrase is there. But she said this, find someone you know and trust. And when you start thinking negatively, pretend you're telling that person and visualize what they would say to you. So put your trust in people who know you best. And to give an example of what she means here, my mom is one of the people that I look to. Both my parents are actually. My mom and my dad, I consider some of my best friends. They've taught me so much in my life. And to Allie's point, if I went to them and said, man, Mom, I don't know if I want to start this podcast because someone's going to get out there and they're going to comment on my podcast. You don't know what you're talking about. Who are you to tell me what to do? Then my mom would be like, who cares what they think? I still care about you. I know that you can do great things. So who cares what that person on the couch said? And I love that point from Allie is like, just imagine that. What would someone you love and trust who's known you your entire life tell you to do at this point in your life? And yeah, I mean, that's the other overall thing is everyone has a way that they do things differently. My friend Eric Smith, he says, for me, I remember that life is made up of a million moments in time. That being said, in my opinion, there's two great things about moments. One, they're short-lived. Two, they're significant because they often impact the next moment based on your reaction or lack thereof. Eric then says, I'm able to overcome mental hurdles by not being in the moment, but putting myself in the next and in the next and in the next. What you do in the moment or how you think in the moment absolutely has ripples. You get to control the ripples in your life. And I know earlier I mentioned like anxiety is thinking in the future, but I think Eric's point here is very important as well, is visualizing what your next is going to be, right? I have a vision for this podcast where I want it to go. I mentioned before, I want to build a community where I can create events and have people show up for things like Health for the Holidays, or if I'm putting together a run on the beach, I'd love to just develop a community of people who want to inspire and help others. That's my vision for the podcast. You have to think in the future for that kind of thing. And that's what I believe Eric is saying here as well. One last piece of advice from another person that's not Brett is my mom. I asked her for the same thing, same way that she overcomes hurdles. And if you're not religious, that's fine. You don't have to be. She said this, I pray for help and try to push forward. It works for me, but it probably doesn't work for everybody. So that's probably true. Because what works for me doesn't work for you. And what works for you might not work for me. But to my mom's point is she prays and then she pushes forward. And that's the important part that I want to focus on is she has that faith to continue, even though those things in her brain are telling her so many times, you got to stop. Don't press publish on that podcast. But my mom is able to say, hey, screw you, stupid Kenny in my brain. I don't want you in there. I'm pressing upload. She does it. This lady's run a business for 5 years. I'm trying to get her on the podcast, but we had some technical difficulties where I couldn't. She's a beast. Go check out snugblankets.com. Not a sponsor, but totally could be if you wanted to, Mom. Hit me up. Anyways, yeah. Guys, we're all going to experience mental hurdles in our life. No matter what you are doing, who you are, where you're at, how much money you have, how much little you have, you're going to experience a mental challenge no matter what. And that's okay. You need to realize that that's okay because we're human. We're expected to. The point is, what are you going to do in those moments? Are you going to give up? Or are you going to do what Drew and I's coach said? You're going to work or cry. You got two choices. And for me, one is much more beneficial than the other. I'd rather work and see something go through. And if I fail, I fail. But at least I did it. Because if you go throughout your entire life and there's things you wanted to do, but you never did it because you're scared, I'd be a lot more scared of being on my deathbed and saying, man, I could have started a podcast that could have inspired one person. And that one person could have gone on to do something extraordinary, but they just needed to hear me talk. But I didn't want to do it because I was scared. That, to me, is a more scary thought than having some clown on the couch comment on my podcast. You don't know what you're talking about. If that's what it takes, if I have to deal with some of those comments, but there's one person that's out there getting after it, I did my job. And that's what I consider a success. So again, one of my biggest, messages for this podcast overall is you need to be patient with yourself. No matter what you're doing, just pause and realize that you're human. You're going to run into these obstacles. And when they come, figure out what works for you to overcome them, because you can. Just don't tell yourself those false stories that you know are out there. You are unique and you can do amazing things. It's true. And with that, I'll let you go. But thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I want to shout out to all my sponsors who so far are zero. Actually, if you're watching this, here's a picture of me on a skateboard deck in the shape of a corn. So for now, thank you to the Cornfields of America for sponsoring this podcast, because I like to eat corn and that fuels me, which ultimately fuels the podcast. So thank you. Shout out to corn, which is another way I get out of my mental hurdles. I don't know where I'm going with this outro. I think I'm just talking now, so I should probably end this. But again, thank you so much for listening. And hopefully we'll get a guest on here soon. Please bear with me as we continue that process. Until then, keep getting after it. If there's something that scares you, that just means you got to do it. Get after it. Thanks for listening.